The scent of dust and old wood filled the narrow attic of the Wijaya family's semi-detached home in Oxford. Amara pulled back a moth-eaten curtain, sunlight spilling across forgotten boxes and yellowing books. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened a sketchbook buried beneath university pamphlets and physics journals. Remnants of the life her father, Bram Wijaya, had always envisioned for her. She turned the pages slowly, each one filled with vivid pencil strokes, portraits, landscapes, digital interface concepts. Her entire journey as an artist captured in quiet defiance. "You still wasting your time with that?" Bram's voice echoed up the attic ladder like a slap. He stood below, arms folded, his brow furrowed as always. Amara didn't respond. She closed the sketchbook carefully, as though preserving a secret. "Dinner's in 10. Don't come down with graphite on your face." He didn't wait for a reply. At the dining table, the air was always heavy. Bram spoke in lectures, not conversations. Her brother, Ezra, nodded along like a loyal student. Only their mother, Citra, offered Amara small, fleeting glances of sympathy, but never words. "So," Bram began, "Ezra just received a call from Cambridge. They're impressed with his paper on neural prediction. Top professors are taking notice." Amara smiled faintly. "That's great. Congratulations." "And what about you, Amara?" Bram asked, tone clipped. "Still doodling for phone apps." "I'm working on an interactive installation for the London Design Week. One of the judges is from the Royal College of Art." He scoffed. "Art is not a career. It's a luxury hobby for people who don't have real responsibilities." Ezra looked down at his plate. Later that night, Amara lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her fingers itched to draw, to build, to create. But in this house, her ambition was invisible. A notification buzzed on her phone. It was an email. Subject: Invitation to collaborate. World Design Summit, Berlin. She sat up straight. Her eyes widened. A world-class exhibition. A chance to prove her worth on a global stage. But the event was only 6 weeks away, and her prototype wasn't ready. She would need time, materials, and belief. None of which existed in this house. From the hallway, she heard Bram's voice through his office door. "We can't have her embarrassing the family. Not when Ezra's about to enter Cambridge." Her heart clenched. She backed away quietly. Tomorrow, she would need to make a decision. A real one. And something in her gut told her, this time, she wouldn't ask for permission. The morning train from Street Pancras to Berlin was nearly full, but Amara found a seat by the window. Her suitcase, stuffed with sketches, prototypes, and her old digital tablet, rested against her leg. She clutched her ticket like it might dissolve if she let go. She hadn't told anyone she was leaving. No farewell note. No dramatic exit. Just silence. The last thing she saw before closing the front door was Bram's certificate-laden study, where dreams were only valid if they came with a degree. Now, for the first time in her life, she was leaving as herself, not someone else's expectation. As the train sped past the countryside, Amara opened her sketchbook and flipped to a blank page. She began sketching the main installation she had in mind. An immersive, reactive light and sound tunnel that would change based on a viewer's movement and emotion. It was ambitious. Too ambitious, perhaps. But it was hers. When she arrived in Berlin, the sharp winter air bit at her face. She checked into a modest hostel just 2 tram stops from the design venue. It wasn't glamorous, but it was enough. She set up a makeshift workstation on the small desk and began working. Sketching, coding, building, troubleshooting. Every night, she video called Ronnie, her closest friend back in London, for encouragement and quick reviews. "You're actually doing this," Ronnie said one night. "You're really going to show up and show them all." Amara smiled. It's now or never. The days blurred. Coffee-fueled nights became early mornings. Her fingers were calloused from wirework and touchpad use. But the tunnel began to take shape. First virtually, then through physical components she managed to piece together with rented equipment. 3 days before the exhibition, her work was inspected by one of the event supervisors. A tall woman in her 50s with icy blue eyes examined her build. "This is unusual," the woman said. "But strangely captivating." Amara swallowed. "Will I still be allowed to present it?" The woman gave a small nod. "Yes. but you'll be placed next to the featured panel, where all the top designers present. Amara's heart stopped. That was either a blessing or a setup for public humiliation. The night before the summit, her phone rang. It was her mother. "Amara," Citra said quietly. "Your father found out you're in Berlin. He's furious. I expected that. He told the alumni sponsors of the university not to support you. He said you're an embarrassment." Amara closed her eyes. "Then I'll just have to make sure they remember me anyway." And she hung up. The grand hall of the Berlin World Design Summit buzzed with energy. Towering installations, kinetic sculptures, augmented reality projections, everything shimmered with brilliance. But amid all the polished exhibits, Amara's corner stood out for its raw energy. Her tunnel glowed faintly, its sensors waiting to respond to human presence. Panels of translucent mesh pulsed with anticipation. She adjusted a final circuit, heart racing. This was it. People started entering: judges, artists, media, curious visitors. Her name tag, barely readable the night before, now sat in full view. Amara Wijaya, United Kingdom. As the first few people stepped into her tunnel, the system kicked in. Soft tones echoed. The lights rippled like waves, shifting colors with each movement. When a child laughed, the ceiling above sparkled in response. When a woman paused in silence, the tunnel dimmed in morning blue. It was beautiful. Raw. Human. A woman wearing a headset turned to Amara. This feels alive." Amara only nodded. Her throat was tight. Then, just as a small crowd began forming, someone stepped into the tunnel, and the lights froze. The sound stuttered. For a second, nothing happened. Then the screen at the exit, one that was supposed to display user emotion feedback, flashed red, then shut off completely. Gasps. Confusion. Amara ran forward. She checked the wiring under the main frame. Everything was in place. A tall man approached from behind. He wore a formal badge and a cold smile. "Having a little hiccup, Miss Wijaya?" Amara looked up, her eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" "Marcus Heinz. Private sponsor liaison. A friend of your father, actually." "Of course." He leaned closer. "Bram sends his regards. And a reminder. He built reputations. He can ruin them too." Amara's hands tightened. "If you touched this installation..." "Oh, I didn't need to. But some wires are so easy to guide. Especially when someone trusts the wrong supplier." He walked off before she could respond. Her heart pounded. She didn't have time to argue. She had to fix this. Fast. Ronnie messaged her. Saw the live stream. Something glitched. Amara replied with one word. Sabotaged. She dropped to her knees, yanked open the sensor box, and began rerouting the power. The next judge was just minutes away. And failure wasn't an option. Amara's fingers moved quickly through the wires, her mind spinning through every possible fault line. She knew her system like the back of her hand. This glitch, this failure, was no coincidence. Someone had tampered with the firmware or disrupted the power calibration. It wasn't a simple malfunction. It was a message. And Bram's fingerprints were all over it. The clock ticked louder in her head as the sound of murmurs and moving footsteps echoed around the hall. She could hear judges at the neighboring booths, their voices distant but growing nearer. One of them, she recognized from the program, Elena Kohler, a design historian with a reputation for dismissing installations that lacked mature theoretical foundation. She had only 10 minutes, maybe less. Amara glanced at the modified circuit board and narrowed her eyes. She could bypass the faulty trigger by isolating the audio response module. The trade-off? No sound. But the light would still respond. Possibly even more intensely without the delay from the audio loop. She made the cut, swapped the jumpers, and secured the board with a twist of cable. A risky move. But risk had always been her silent language. She took a deep breath. Then she reset the system. For a second, nothing happened. The tunnel stayed dark. But then with a flicker, the lights bloomed. Red, gold, teal, like an aurora unfurling. When she waved her hand inside, the sensors followed her, painting the path with dancing lights. No sound. But it pulsed like a heartbeat. Behind her, someone cleared their throat. Elena Kohler had arrived. Amara stood up and faced her. I apologize. There was a short interruption. The sound function is disabled temporarily, but the installation remains fully responsive. Kohler raised a brow, unimpressed. And the theoretical premise? Amara didn't blink. Adaptive empathy. A visual translation of emotional presence in a shared space. The silence is not absence, it's amplification. Kohler stepped inside. The lights surged with her motion, wrapping around her like a slow storm. For a full minute, she said nothing. Then she stepped out. Unexpected, she said. And strangely, effective. She moved on. Amara didn't realize she'd been holding her breath until the moment passed. Her hands trembled, but she smiled. The tide had not turned, but it hadn't drowned her either. An hour later, when the crowd had thinned, she took a moment to breathe. Her booth still stood, alive and reactive. Around her, technicians were beginning to disassemble exhibits. She had survived day one. Then, a man approached her from the shadows near the curtain wall. He looked about 40, balding, with sharp gray eyes and a lanyard that read, Private Collector. I saw what you did to fix that system mid-exhibit, he said. Amara straightened. It wasn't supposed to fail. Of course not, he said. But most people would have folded. You didn't. That's rare. He handed her a card. On it, embossed in deep silver, was the name Damien Holt. I fund original experiences. You've got a month. Pitch me something bigger than this tunnel. Something unforgettable. Before she could reply, he had already disappeared into the crowd. That night, back in the hostel, Amara stared at the card under her lamp. Around her, bunkmates were asleep. The Berlin winter howled beyond the frosted window. Her father had tried to sabotage her. Had sent someone to shut her down. But she was still here. She opened her tablet. Sketched a rough spiral. A dome. A chamber that could feel like breathing. Unforgettable. Back in London, the sky was bruised with winter grey. Amara stepped off the train at St. Pancras with a single bag slung across her shoulder and Damien Holt's card clutched tightly in her coat pocket. The world hadn't changed, but she had. At the very edge of Camden, past the rows of derelict warehouses and forgotten artist lofts, she found it. An abandoned auto repair garage with rusted shutters and walls stained by rain. It wasn't much, but it had electricity, a back room for sleeping, and just enough roof to keep the wind out. She signed the lease with the last of her grant money. Her savings were gone. Every cent was now being funneled into what she called Project Lumen. She started with scavenged parts, industrial LED strips from a scrap market in Hackney, sensors from broken security systems, and motion trackers stripped out of obsolete gaming gear. The room smelled of solder and burnt plastic. Each night, she worked until dawn, her breath fogging the inside of her scarf as she ran simulations on her battered laptop. But something about the process awakened her. There was no panel judging her, no mentor breathing down her neck. Only her and the machine learning to speak in light. One evening, deep into January, the door rattled open. It was Maisie, her old uni roommate turned urban tech sculptor. She carried a thermos and a toolbox. You look like a cryptid, Maisie said, setting the tools down. I thought you dropped off the grid. Amara laughed, hoarse from lack of sleep. I kind of have. Maisie sipped from the thermos and peered at the half-built dome in the middle of the room. So this is the next big thing? It's a biome for memory, Amara said softly. Each movement triggers a pattern from the past. Color tied to emotion. It learns you. Maisie nodded. You're not building an installation. You're building a language. The word struck Amara like a tuning fork. That was it. She wasn't just making light respond. She was teaching it to feel. Over the next 2 weeks, they worked side by side. Maisie helped reframe the wiring while Amara restructured the interface. They slept in shifts, cooked with a camp stove, and used the garage walls as their blueprint. Paintings of spectrum arcs, emotion trees, and gesture maps took shape on every surface. Then, one bitter morning, as Amara tested the final memory sweep sequence, the light pulsed back, not just in color, but rhythm. A response that matched the pattern of her breath. It was alive. That afternoon, Damien Holt arrived for the promised demo. He stepped inside the dome, cautious, curious. Amara watched from behind the sensor rig, heart thundering. "Do I do anything?" he asked. "Just exist," she said. As Damien moved, the lights rippled around him, shifting into a mosaic of cool blues and soft pinks. He raised his hand. A burst of green shimmered. When he laughed, just once, it triggered a spark of white and gold. Then he stopped. "It knows I'm amused." "Yes," Amara whispered. "It's remembering you." He stood in silence for a moment longer, then stepped out. "I've never seen anything like it," he said. "But this doesn't belong in a gallery. This belongs in lives." Amara blinked. "What do you mean?" "I'll set up a meeting. Investors. Innovators. You're not just an artist anymore, Amara. You're a systems designer." Later that night, when Maisie was asleep, Amara stared up at the dim ceiling. Her father's voice still echoed in the back of her mind, bitter and smug. "You'll crumble the first time the wind blows." But she hadn't. The storm had come, and she was still standing. 2 weeks later, Amara walked into a sleek conference room overlooking the Thames. Frost patterned the wide windows, and inside sat 5 people in tailored suits, each with eyes sharp as razors and smiles polished like marble. Damien greeted her with a slight nod. "Don't let them intimidate you," he murmured. But Amara didn't feel intimidated. She felt ready. They were representatives from 3 venture firms and a prominent innovation foundation. Names she'd only heard whispered at exhibitions or tacked onto the walls of institutions that once turned her away. Now they were here to court her. She activated the demo with a flick of her wrist. The dome, rebuilt in a portable form, bloomed in the center of the room. White beams spiraled upward like growing vines, then dimmed, waiting. One of the investors, a woman with silver hair and ice-blue eyes, stepped forward. She raised her hand. The lights rippled, shifting from lavender to deep rose. "This is emotional intelligence?" she asked. "Visual empathy," Amara replied. "It recognizes tone, presence, even breathing patterns. It doesn't just respond. It listens." There was silence, then nods. One by one, the board entered the dome, each greeted with a unique spectrum. By the end they were leaning in. Impressed. Hooked. "You've created a sensory memory environment," said the man from Elbrook Capital. "How scalable is it?" "Modular," she answered. "I can configure it for therapy, education, or public spaces." As questions flowed, Amara felt something unfamiliar. Control. Her answers were sharp, her vision clear. The girl they called naive was gone. After the meeting, Damien joined her by the lift. "They're in," he said. "The foundation's ready to offer a starting grant and mentorship. They see what I see." Amara smiled. "It's a start." That evening, while she celebrated with Maisie over greasy chips and sparkling cider, she received an email from Freya Lang. Her breath caught. Freya Lang, curator of the International Light Tech Biennale in Rotterdam. A name once out of reach. "We'd like to extend a formal invitation for you to present Project Lumen at our opening keynote. Your proposal represents a bold, intuitive leap in effective technology. We look forward to discussing logistics." Amara stared at the screen in disbelief. It was real. Not a dream, not a pitch, not a maybe. A door. Finally open. But euphoria didn't last long. The next morning, her inbox was flooded with legal threats. Not from a competitor, but from her own father. He claimed partial intellectual ownership of the concept behind Project Lumen, citing an obscure clause in a university development contract. Attached was a document with his name co-signed next to hers, one she'd signed years ago, never realizing what it could be twisted into. Maisie was furious. "He's trying to ride your success like a leech." Damien, ever calm, read through the document. "It's weak," he said. "But in the wrong hands, it could cast doubt. Investors spook easily." Suddenly, it wasn't just her past haunting her. It was actively sabotaging her future. She stood in her workshop that night, hands clenched at her sides. The lights around her flickered, mirroring her rage. She thought she had left him behind, but he was still trying to pull her down. Even now, when she'd proven she could rise without him, she could either let this derail her, or face him. On her terms. Amara took a breath. Then opened a new document on her laptop. Subject line: response to claim of co-ownership. She would fight. Not with desperation but precision. Not to prove herself, but to protect what she had built. The silence inside the legal chamber was thicker than the fog that clung to London's streets that morning. Amara sat at the long oak table across from her father, whose smirk barely concealed the venom beneath. His solicitor, a thin man with colorless lips, tapped the contract before them. "You signed here, Ms. Alcott. During your final year at university. This document gives Mr. Alcott shared intellectual rights to any project stemming from that research." Amara's hands were steady. Damien sat beside her, legal counsel just behind them, flipping through binders filled with emails, revisions, dated lab journals, all hers. "No," she said calmly, "this project is independent. It evolved years after I left that lab. What's more, that clause specifies joint ownership only if development was funded by institutional support. Lumen was built in my mother's shed." Her father scoffed. "Where do you think you got the materials, the mind for it? You wouldn't be here without me." "You're right," she said coldly. "If you hadn't thrown me out, I never would have pushed this far." His jaw twitched. For a flicker of a second, the facade cracked. Amara slid a USB across the table. "This contains the full lineage of Lumen's code, patents, designs. Not one document involves you or your funding. If this goes to court, I will subpoena your bank records from the last 10 years. I know what you did to the innovation grant, how you funneled it into your other businesses." Silence. Her father's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "That's speculative." "No," Damien interjected. "That's prosecutable." The lawyer whispered into Mr. Alcott's ear. His face paled. Minutes later they stood, muttered something about a delay in proceedings, and left. Amara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Later that evening, she sat alone at the old railway bridge near Camden. The water beneath shimmered with amber city light. Her phone buzzed. A message from Freya Lang. "Looking forward to Rotterdam. Also, an offer. Would you consider collaborating on our new AI emotive installation? It would mean relocation for 6 months. Let me know if you're ready." 6 months. In Europe. Away from everything. A fresh chapter. But then came a second message. From Maisie. Another investor just offered to help scale Lumen into educational therapy centers across the UK. They want you at the helm. It's big, Amara. Like, national big. Her heart thudded. 2 doors. Both open. One promised international prestige, creative evolution. The other, direct impact, real change, homegrown recognition. She gazed at the water. And remembered her mother's voice, once murmured behind a bedroom door. "Build something only you can build, even if no one claps." She stood. Walked back to her studio. And chose. Not the easier path. Not the louder one. But the one that would carry her voice, her light, into the rooms that had once locked her out. Spring returned to London with a softness Amara hadn't noticed in years. Morning sunlight slid across the glass-paneled studio she now called headquarters. The old art school posters still hung on one wall, faded but proud. And in the corner, quiet, humming, the newest iteration of Lumen sat glowing, like a heart made of light. Amara poured herself tea as Maisie buzzed through the door. They confirmed it. The Department of Education. Full rollout across 3 boroughs by summer. Amara smiled slowly. 3 boroughs. That's real children, real change. Maisie nodded, her face flushed with disbelief and pride. And they want you to present at the National Summit. Front page. Keynote. Amara didn't speak. She stepped over to the desk where a worn notebook lay. The first sketches of Lumen, drawn in the margins of old train tickets and receipts, stared back at her. Outside the world moved. Inside it felt like stillness. But stillness did not mean silence. 2 weeks later, the summit hall buzzed with reporters, innovators, skeptics. Amara stood backstage in a tailored navy dress, palms pressed together, breathing slowly. Her name was called. As she walked on stage, a hush fell. The lights dimmed. Behind her, a massive screen flickered to life with the image of a child interacting with Lumen. Eyes wide, emotions translated, a spark of connection born from code and care. "Good afternoon," she began, her accent poised, voice unwavering. "3 years ago, I was told that my ideas were too sentimental, too abstract. That I would crumble under pressure. I nearly did." A pause. "But today, I stand here not in spite of that moment. I stand here because of it." She shared the journey, of leaving home, of finding allies, of betrayal and choice. She didn't name her father. She didn't need to. The story carried itself. "I built Lumen," she finished, "because I believe emotion is not weakness. It is data. And compassion, when coded with purpose, is power." The applause rolled in waves, long and sustained. Later, alone in the quiet backstage hallway, she checked her phone. A text. From her brother. "I was wrong. You didn't just survive, Amara. You built something unstoppable." She replied simply, "Thank you. I hope you find your own light too." Her thumb hovered over another message. From her father. Unread. She didn't open it. Not because of hate. But because she didn't need to anymore. He had taken enough space in her story. Now this story was hers. She turned the screen off. Stepped out into the echoing hum of the city that once overlooked her. And smiled. Not for the applause. Not for the spotlight. But because, for the first time in her life, she didn't need a room at someone else's table. She had built her own. And it had windows full of sunlight.